Hello everyone, this is Ryan and lesson 25 of learning JavaScript. In this lesson we're going to create our very own slideshow. So we'll start by adding a picture. I've got a whole bunch of pictures which I've added to my pics folder. So I'm going to start by putting in a baby elephant. The reason why we like to put in at least one picture as a default is so that if someone does not have a browser that supports JavaScript, they'll at least see one picture on the screen, even if the slideshow never works. And I'm also going to add a caption underneath the image, just as a little description. Make sure that you give your image an ID so that we can use JavaScript to manipulate it later on. And also your caption should also have an ID. So you should start off with a single picture on the screen with a single caption on the screen. So now we do the JavaScript. Once the document is finished loading, we can retrieve our image tag and we can retrieve our caption, our span tag. So I'm going to create global variables for these because we need to manipulate them inside of another function. And then we can initialize them using document.getElementById. And then I'm going to call the rotate function, which is a function which we're going to create. The purpose of this function is to rotate the images. So before we can rotate images, we need to define a list of all of our images. So we'll create an array to do this. And then you need to just look at your picture names and put them all in. So there's my images. Now we need some sort of variable to keep track of which image we're busy with. So I'm going to create a counter and start it off at 0, because remember the array begins at 0. So I'm going to need to use some JavaScript to manipulate the src property of this image. So we can just say pic.src and then pull an image from our pics folder. So I'm just going to use the array. Remember that we could say 0 or we could say 1 depending on which image we want to display. I'm going to use the counter that we created. And then once we have displayed the image, we can increase the value of the counter and use the window.setTimeout function to call the rotate function again. We learnt about the window timer in the previous lesson. You give it the number of milliseconds to wait before calling itself again. So after every 3 seconds it should call the same function over and over again. So there you can see that the slideshow is moving on from one image to the next image. At this point in time our captions are not changing. After the blue butterfly I have a problem because that's the last image. So it doesn't have any more to go after that. So I need some way to tell it to move back to the beginning again once it's come to the end. So the easiest way to do that is just to use a ternary operator again and a little test. So if the counter is less than the number of pictures, -1 because the array starts at 0, then set the counter to counter +1. Otherwise, set the counter to 0. Remember, the way the ternary operator works is that if the test results in a true condition, the instruction after the question mark will be carried out. Otherwise, the instruction after the colon will be carried out if it's false. And while we're at it, let's just add some captions. We'll make a separate array for the captions. Captions will just describe what each image is all about. And we will also need to then somehow change this text every time. So we've got the span tag, the entire span tag. We retrieved that using document.getElementById caption. So the caption variable represents the entire span tag. So all I need to do is set the inner HTML property of the span tag to change the content of that text. So we'll say caption.innerHTML, and then we'll grab the caption from the captions array, and I'll just use the same counter I was using for the image so that the captions correspond to the images. Okay, so let's test this. So the caption rotated, which is great. Now we must just make sure that once it's done the blue butterfly, it goes back to the baby elephant again. So there's the blue butterfly, and it goes back to the baby elephant. So this now will run forever until such time as we close the browser, with the photos rotating and the captions changing. The one issue that there is now with this program is that as soon as you upload it to the internet, there's going to be a delay in waiting for each one of these pictures to download. So what we have to do is we need to get JavaScript to preload all of these images into memory before the slideshow begins. So to do this for one image, you would have to create a child of the image object, the built-in image object, and then set the src property of that object to a particular image that you want to preload. So these 2 lines of code is all you need to preload one image into memory, but we need to do it for each and every one of these images. So the easiest way to do it will be to create a for loop. So I'll start by creating an empty array, which I'm going to use to do the preloading, and then I'll use a for in loop, which will loop around every single picture. And then we would need to say preload. It's an array, and x represents first a 0, then a 1, then a 2. And I would say equal to new image to create a child of that image object. And then set the source property of the image to be something from the pics folder, and in this case something from the pics array. We'll just use x as our counter. So this for loop should loop around each one of these images and load them into memory. And the nice thing about it is the onload will only trigger once everything in the document's finished loading. That includes the preload, because we're doing all of this preloading outside the functions. So this will be the very first thing that executes before anything on the page loads. all the images in the slideshow will have loaded into memory, and only then will this function start, which means the slideshow can only start once all the images are preloaded into memory. So the way to test this, just refresh and run it again. If everything seems to be working, then looks like you have success. The ultimate test will be to upload this to the internet and just to see that the speed is instantaneous as well. You can always check your JavaScript console for errors. You can go Ctrl-Shift-J in most browsers to open up the console, and I don't have any errors in my console, so that means I'm quite happy. And there is the end of this lesson on how to use the window timer to create a slideshow.